Yes! That's awesome!
Whew. All right, so Avowed. What can we say? There's been a lot of drama about this game, and rightfully so in many ways, and in other ways, not so much. I'm not here to convince you that you should buy Avowed or even that you should play Avowed. I'm just here to talk about my experience with the game. It is, in many ways, a truly mixed bag. It may be exactly what you're looking for, but it may be exactly what you don't want in a game of this style. You see, Avowed is a smaller project in many ways, though it comes with a high-budget sort of appeal and look to it. And so those approaching Avowed thinking that they're going to get the next Bethesda-style open-world RPG will likely be very disappointed. But those coming to Avowed with a more limited and special niche interest may find Avowed is just for them. I found myself somewhere in the middle, liking certain parts but disliking other parts, and in many ways I found Avowed to be a difficult game to talk about, particularly with all the drama surrounding it and people taking vastly different sides on the issue. Avowed released for everyone on February 18th, 2025, having been available early for those willing to pay $90 USD, and therein lies a big issue with Avowed. It's just not worth paying full price for this game in my opinion. Not at $70, much less so at $90. It is in many ways the quintessential Game Pass game. This is the kind of game that you may want to play, but you don't want to pay for it. And while it has a lot of issues to consider, it's also legitimately not a terrible game. Allow me to take you through my experience of Avowed, played for no additional cost to me on PC Game Pass. I'm Fox with RealMarcFoxx, and this is your home for rational, reasonable, and real gamers, and you're watching The Foxx Experience.
I'd buy that for $1.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It does a lot to help the channel, really supports what I do here, and if you like my content, well, that's one perfect way to show it. And don't forget to follow me on X as well, because I have tons of hot takes on there. Lots of hot takes. You'll love those hot takes. Avowed was mired in controversy, beginning with the switch from a dark and grittier announcement trailer to a far more colorful, even gaudy game of bright purple and pink hues. It can certainly be argued that the color palette fits the world and story, given what's going on in it, but that doesn't change gamers' perceptions. And therein lies one of the biggest problems with Avowed: perception. No, not the in-game perception stat, it's the perception that gamers were given of this game. Notice I didn't say the perception gamers took of the game, I said the perception they were given, because it was indeed a perception that was given by the developer. More specifically, the radical woke lunatic Matt Hansen. When it was leaked that the game would have pointless, immersion-breaking modern-day pronouns, a sure sign of woke influence, Elon took to X to say, having pronouns in a fantasy video game is utterly unacceptable. Angry face emoji. Elon was and is 100% correct. Having pronouns in a fantasy RPG is completely out of place, and it is unacceptable. I would argue they don't belong in any game, as they are an apodictic affront to basic biology and common sense. The best thing Obsidian could have done was to correct the flaw in the game by removing the pronouns entirely, but we know companies tend not to do the right thing. Instead, for their own sake, they should have ignored the tweet. But such was not the case. Matt Hansen, art director for Avowed, took to X to declare, "I wanted so badly to make him mad with my game, and I can't believe it actually worked. Just wait until you see the default, you sad little sh." He further posted saying, "It's honestly deeply surreal to have the world's richest blank boy whine about something I am making. I am quite frankly giddy. I cannot think of a single person in the world I would rather irritate." He also previously posted on X that there are too many crusty white dudes in video games, at least in video game development, which of course implies that there should be fewer white people, and that is not okay. It's not okay to come out and say that you think some race should be reduced as to their presence in the video game industry. That is racist. Specifically in this case, anti-white. So obviously Matt Hansen is garbage, but his words did far more than reveal his anti-white bigotry and left-wing activism. It communicated to gamers that Avowed might be the next big woke flop. Riding on the tattered coattails of Dragon Age Veilguard's failed release, Avowed looked to be next in line. It was an RPG in an established franchise, the Pillars of Eternity franchise, and it had the oversaturated color palette and indications of woke elements. Furthermore, images of ugly and outright disgusting character designs started to emerge, further cementing the notion for all real gamers that this game was woke trash. I can only imagine how many gamers wrote it off at that point, never to reconsider. And for those of you who did, I have no desire to change your mind. Hansen's words alone could serve as justification to avoid the game, giving it the mock title Avoid rather than Avowed. The pronouns, ugly characters, and transgender-looking NPCs were spoiled icing on the shit cake. But since I have a YouTube channel and Avowed is garnering a lot of attention for reasons, I chose to give it a shot for no additional cost to me via PC Game Pass, and surprisingly, I found it to be far better than I imagined, though not without a lot of glaring issues. Issues big enough to make it hard to recommend without reservations. Firstly, to anyone avoiding the game for any of the aforementioned reasons, do not take this video as any effort on my part to convince you otherwise. If you're avoiding this game because you genuinely believe it's made with bad intentions because of Matt Hansen's actions and some of the content contained in it, then stay the course. Stick with what you're doing. Avoid the game. Don't buy it and don't play it. I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. There are so many other games you could play, and Avowed definitely is not worth the price of a full game in my opinion. Secondly, to those who can access the game at no additional charge or are considering buying it at a deep discount, then that might be the way to go. A game selling moderately but falling short of expectations is still sending a message to the developer and publisher. Next time, do something better. That's the message it sends. Avowed still has pronouns, but they are turned off by default, contradicting Hansen's original declaration that they were on by default. This is a good half step in the right direction. A full step would be to take them out entirely. They add nothing, hurt the fantasy immersion, and only serve to rile up the rightfully anti-woke community, of which I am wholeheartedly a part. I am unabashedly 100% anti-woke. Please don't misunderstand me or make any mistake on this issue. I am 100% hardcore anti-woke, and I would love for all the DEI woke nonsense to completely die off. Period. But unfortunately, this deeply embedded disease will need to be removed through a long period of hard work and effort. The hateful woke propagandists have wormed their way deep into the roots of gaming, determined to spread their bigoted ideology far and wide and in every way they can. Given all that, playing games in today's landscape involves navigating varying levels of wokeness, each and every one of us determining how much we'll put up with and how we'll respond. Communicating your displeasure to the devs and publishers is key, but so is also avoiding the games too corrupted by the woke mind virus to be worth the bother. I don't tell my audience not to harass or send death threats. Why? Because my primary audience, real gamers, are not the harassers. They are the harassed. They are the victims of harassment, not the perpetrators. We, the gamers, are the ones who get harassed by game developers, by publishers, by community managers, and by the rightfully well-hated mainstream
game journalists,
who are little more than activists and actually anti-gamers. They tend to hate gamers. They even use the term gamer as an insult. Avowed has a Metacritic user score of 6.9, teetering on that classic IGN beloved score of 7. And this is where I'd place Avowed if I were to give it a score. I'd probably rate it around a 6.5 to a 7. That's not to say that it's outright bad, but it's also saying that it's not outright great. Critics rate it higher, but the critics are composed of the previously stated anti-gamer faux journalists who rate games with woke content higher than they deserve. Why? Propaganda, activism, and left-wing ideology. They rate games with woke content higher than the game actually deserves because it matches their personal political and ideological views. This is not something they should be doing because a game reviewer should be reviewing the game and not accounting for any sort of modern-day real-world politics and how they're represented in that fantasy world. It has a mostly positive rating on Steam with a peak concurrent user count of 19,198 as of the writing of this video. Veilguard was considered an abject failure despite hitting numbers in the mid-40,000. And this is where my experience with the game fell, in that middling gray area of somewhere between it's okay to wow, this part is awesome to wow, this part sucks. Allow me to start where Avowed shines. Combat. We all know it's hard to get fantasy combat right in a first-person RPG. Most games have alternated between lackluster basic attacks or an all-out medieval combat simulator. I'm not looking for realistic toe-to-toe swordplay. I'd rather have more fantasy in my fantasy games. I don't want my fantasy games to be a medieval combat simulator. Comparisons to Oblivion and Skyrim are impossible not to make as they seem similar in so many ways, but Avowed exceeds both of those games in combat, giving you a breadth of tools at your disposal. This is where Avowed captured my interest enough to keep me going and even, eventually, finish the game. I didn't do everything, but I did quite a few side quests and some exploration. My playthrough clocked in at 22.6 hours, which was shorter than I expected, but again, there was a lot of content I left on the table. I went with a melee build, which I hear from most people is the least exciting of the three options. While you can mix and match, there are three basic trees to spec into: Fighter, Ranger, and Wizard. You're never locked out of any tree, but some skills require prior investment of your ability points. Other than nabbing the parry ability from the Ranger class, I stuck entirely to Fighter. Why parry is in the Ranger class, I have no idea. It seems far more fitting for a warrior style class like Fighter, but parry is apparently a Ranger ability. Whatever. The melee combat gave me enough to keep me going, though it did get repetitive at times. If you want the best experience with the most options, you'll probably want to go with the Wizard. It seems that Obsidian put the most effort into spell casting. The variety of spells combined with the amazing special effects, topped off with their constant focus on magic and gameplay footage, makes it clear they want you to play as a wizard. It's not Harry Potter, but it might as well be, right? It's very clear. Obsidian built this game around the magic, and they really pushed the magic in all the gameplay trailers, so I think the intention is for you to play as a wizard. Dodging is my one big complaint. It's linked to the same button as jump, spacebar for us PC master racers. You can't dodge forward, so you have to hold A, S, or D and press the jump button. I would often jump by mistake, taking a hit I otherwise wouldn't if it had been a dedicated button. I also swapped the E and F buttons, as F is the basic use or take command, which is strange because so many games use E for this that I didn't want to retrain my muscle memory. I mean, I'm so used to hitting the E key for use or take or interact with. Why am I going to switch to F at this point? We all know that F is the key you press to pay respects. You get some godlike abilities tied to the story, and that's one of the issues I have with the game. Being a godlike, you have to have some sort of fungal-like growth coming out of your head. Thankfully, you can turn this off visually, but it's still actually there and characters will respond to it. The options range from ugly, really ugly, and disgustingly ugly. I get the story reason for it, but these growths ultimately just look gross to me. But maybe that's because I don't like mushrooms. No, I don't like any kind of mushroom anywhere. I don't like the way they look. I don't like the way they taste. I don't like the texture of the mushrooms. I know if a mushroom is in something I'm eating, anytime I eat it, I can tell right away. Cream of mushroom soup, whatever it is. Don't like mushrooms, so maybe I just have this sort of thing against mushrooms. If you like mushrooms, hey, maybe you'll like Avowed a lot more than I did. And Avowed is full of fungi. Fungus on you, fungus in the environment, fungus on enemies, even entirely fungus enemies themselves. Yes, you fight mushrooms. And humans sprouting mushrooms out of their bodies, because that's cool, I guess, if you like mushrooms. Story-wise, it all makes sense to have all this fungal growth, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. And like it, I don't. So people complain about the character creator. I played only in first person, so the fact I don't see myself most of the time makes it so much less important to me. I've never cared much for crafting my own character, but if you do, you'll be disappointed by the lack of customizability here. Me? I just wish the defaults looked better so I can pick something really simple and roll with it. So what else do I like about Avowed? Well, let me tell you. Exploration. This is one spot where Avowed does excel in many ways. Wow, did they nail this element, for the most part. Not only is there a ton of land to venture out into, but it's packed with stuff. Side quests, enemies, loot, and well-hidden treasures abound. You'll be jumping and climbing all over the place, and these mechanics are actually implemented well. I rarely ever found myself missing an intended jump, and when I did, it's because I forgot to run before jumping over a longer gap. Running doesn't use stamina in this game, which is absolutely awesome, because I hate it in games like this when you just want to run somewhere to get there as fast as possible, but you're constantly running out of stamina, so you got to slow down to regenerate stamina and then take off running again and then slow down again and then run again. Just give me unlimited running, and that's exactly what Avowed does. That went a long way in helping me to enjoy Avowed. Avowed allows you to stay on the move, running fast, jumping, even sliding as you crouch while running. There are breakable walls, some requiring fire, ice, or explosives. You can use spells or grenades for these. Some areas have more than one way into them. Chests and doors are locked sometimes. Some require a set story-based key, others have a key that can be found, or you can just pick the lock with a lockpick. There's no lockpicking skill or minigame, just hold the button and wait. Buy these lockpicks every time you see them. Trust me. You can even use spells or grenades to assist with traversal, forming ice platforms in water or on top of lava. Yes, that's right. You can form ice on lava and it stays there for a little bit. I'm pretty sure it would melt pretty darn fast, but I've never actually dealt with lava in person. I just imagine it's very hot. Items chests shimmer by default, but you can turn this off. I left it on for ease of finding stuff. They also produce a shimmering sound effect, helping you to audibly know when treasure's nearby. Super useful. Though sometimes I would look around for that shimmering sound effect I was hearing and couldn't find it. If I looked long enough, I usually did, but occasionally I'd just be like, I have no idea where that sound effect is coming from. I've looked for a little while, I'm just gonna give up now. Unfortunately, that classic design reminiscent of Bethesda rears its ugly head here. Loading zones. It's not as bad as Skyrim was about it, but there are many areas where entering them requires running into an invisible wall and getting a prompt to hit a button to enter. This leads to a loading screen. Starfield is far worse, but it'd be nice to get away from the old school loading zones limitations of previous generations. There are open world games today with few or even no loading zones whatsoever, so let's do away with them, okay? There are even tricks devs can use to hide the loaded new areas. One such example was the Metroid Prime series, where the time it took for some doors to open was actually a cleverly disguised load time. Pretty neat, huh? Did you already know that? If so, let me know in the comments section below. You can do some underwater traveling, though it's pretty limited. You have limited breath, so don't drown. A morbidly ironic little bit of trivia for you. Did you know that one of the Beach Boys band members actually died by drowning? You'd think that'd be an urban myth, but it's true. Weapons and armor can be upgraded, and this is a process that will continue throughout the entire game until the very end zone. If you find an awesome weapon early on and want to stick with it for the rest of the playthrough, you can. I love that. You also find upgraded weapons as you progress, so switching it up is not discouraged. I found a nice fire sword that healed me as I fought, and I stuck with it for the entirety of my playthrough. Same with the shield, found a special shield early on and never gave up on it. Good old sword and board for me. It's what I like in these games, and no matter how many times I try to go with a magic-based build in an RPG like these, I always end up going back to the good old sword and shield. One problem here is the sponginess of many of the enemies. On normal difficulty, basic enemies can take quite a lot of hits to kill. Hitting enemies 5, 7, 10 times isn't unusual. And considering that most enemies come in large batches, this means dozens and dozens of attacks per battle. This is one of the few games where I'd recommend setting it to easy to avoid this monotony. There's a crafting system in which you can craft recipes for food or craft better upgrade materials from lesser ones. These are useful, although I found myself inundated with so much food that I couldn't possibly use it all. Crafting food into recipes takes a long time. I spent several minutes just making recipes, only to have my cat jump on top of my PC and shut it down in the middle of my game. I finally solved this problem, which has happened a couple times now, by turning off the power button functionality in the Windows settings. So, take that, cats. No more shutting my PC off on me. So, what's wrong with Avowed? Well, a lot. Firstly, the game world is mostly lifeless and dull. Nearly everyone and everything is a static set piece. You can't interact with most NPCs, and the characters are almost all stuck in one position doing pretty much nothing. You can't attack them either. NPCs don't have schedules, you can steal anything and everything and no one cares. There's no thievery system, there's no pickpocketing, the guards ignore enemies that attack you, just completely oblivious. Arrows you shoot stick in pretty much everything until they disappear, even rock, brick, and metal. So much of this world is static and unmoving that it's impossible not to feel deprived when so many games have done far better in the past. There's a well-known video that highlights the lack of interactivity in Avowed by comparing it to Oblivion, a game that is nearly 20 years old now. Ultima 5 was released in 1988, and even it had NPCs that moved about with their own schedules. This continued with Ultima 6 in 1990 and Ultima 7 in 1992. Games from over 30 years ago had more believable NPCs and world interaction than 2025's Avowed. That's sad. That's really sad. And people can argue they didn't make Avowed to be that type of game, but that's what gamers expect nowadays. Why would we expect to go backwards in terms of features and believability of the world, interactivity? We should be moving forward, if anything, not backwards. Compare this game to Kingdom Come Deliverance, the first or second game, and you'll see just how dead and uninspired the world is by comparison. Anyone can claim a game could have had more and done more, but that's not the issue. This isn't a could have been scenario so much as it is a should have been scenario. And that's one thing people are getting confused. It's not about the fact that a game can always have more, no matter matter what a developer does with a game, no matter how hard they work on it, people can always go, oh, well, it doesn't have this or it doesn't have that, it could have had more. Yes, games can always have more, but when you play a game and feel like it definitely should have had more, then it probably should have had more, at least in your opinion. And in the opinion of many, many people who played Avowed, this game should have had a lot more interactivity and a lot more to the world than it does. So people expected more from a game like this, and rightfully so. Avowed should have had a more interactive world. Even Outer Worlds did so much more in this regard. You can watch a video comparing the two, and that's from the same developer. So why such a stark downgrade? It's hard to know for sure, but I think development hell had a lot to do with it. The game's development switched gears at least once, if not twice, in a big way, abandoning multiplayer notions. They may have realized they needed to focus on a smaller scope and more realistic budget at that point. The voice acting is decent, but the story is the big issue here. It's just okay. Not great, it's not terrible, it's alright. And the problem with an alright story in an Obsidian RPG is I think we've come to expect more. After all, many people consider Fallout New Vegas the best Fallout that there was. They consider it better than 3 or 4, and Fallout New Vegas was from Obsidian. Not the same exact people, a lot has changed at Obsidian, but still, people have expectations from developers and studios, and those expectations are rightfully placed. Not only that, but being from the Pillars of Eternity series, which is known for having an amazing story, people expected a much better story, and they didn't get it. And that's sad. I would argue Oblivion had a better story in 2006, and few people would say that story was anything special. So temper your expectations, don't pay more than $40 tops, and you'll find Avowed to be a sufficient gaming experience, as long as you don't mind what it doesn't have. But that's the problem. We should expect so much more, and it seems most gamers did just that, leading to the massive disappointment that the game has rightfully garnered. Now we have to talk about the dreaded misconception of diversity, or the illusion of it. Modern woke devs mistakenly think that you can make a diverse world by simply haphazardly mixing all different races and species everywhere and expect it to work. In what context would it be believable that all different kinds of races and species would coexist in the same place and yet not only not experience any dissonance or conflict, but pretty much not even acknowledge their differences? Human races exist because of the strikingly different environments in which those people lived. Those in hotter climates with stronger sunlight develop darker skin to resist burning and therefore have less tolerance for cold. Those in northern climates with colder seasons have lighter skin tones with a higher resistance to cold. Those lighter skin tones allow them to absorb more of the sun since there's less of it in terms of its strength. Google the concept of regional haplotypes. A race of people with darker skin should therefore primarily inhabit a warmer region with stronger sunlight. People with lighter skin should be in colder northern climates with weaker sunlight. A race of humanoids with thick fur should be better adapted for an even colder climate, most likely one that is often snowy. And yet, in Avowed, there are no regional differences with the races and species. All types of people and humanoid creatures exist everywhere, and in roughly equal proportions. If anything, Avowed has an overabundance of darker skinned races for no in-game reason. It'd be one thing to see a greater racial diversity in the larger cities with trade ports, but this diversity exists everywhere, even in the smaller places. It's as if all humanoid haplotypes exist everywhere, all at the same time, contrary to basic biology and common sense. Given how vastly different these races and species look from one another, how is it that no one seems to care, much less harbor any bias or hatred? It's like everyone in the game is race blind, color blind, even species blind. And, not surprisingly, the woke devs felt the need to overrepresent non-white types, heavily favoring dark-skinned peoples to an extreme. Go ahead and play Avowed and take note of just how many dark-skinned characters fill up the world. Remember when RPGs used to have different races and humanoid species inhabit different regions, each adapted to their own environment, having their own languages, cultures, architecture, food, weapons, and so on? Making everyone the same while looking different is not diversity. It's a devaluation of the differences that make us different. Imagine traveling the world, going to different countries all over the place, and finding that everyone looks the same, speaks the same, has the same culture, makes the same food, has the same architecture. Would it be nearly as interesting to travel the world? Yeah, you might see some different landscapes, but everything else would be the same. The reason people enjoy traveling the world is because they see different peoples with different languages and different cultures and different foods and different architecture and different religions and all sorts of different things that they can experience. Diversity isn't about everyone looking the same. Diversity doesn't mean a bunch of different looking people all being the exact same and doing the exact same and having the exact same interests and having the exact same religion and same language and same culture and same architecture. That's not it. Woke design hurts video games because it destroys believability, and in the greatest ironic twist, It actually undermines the very notion of diversity within the game world. The closest Avowed got to being believable in this regard was the dwarf-like region in the game. Imagine if Avowed's different regions all had believability in races, species, architecture, and culture. Would it not be a much more interesting and believable game world? Wouldn't it make it more interesting to move from zone to zone when the zones actually have different peoples and cultures and languages and architectures in them? Suspension of disbelief in fantasy is important. Each and every element of a game that breaks this suspension only further hurts immersion, and eventually the game starts to scream woke, diversity, current day political correctness. No one wants this, not even the woke themselves, as we can clearly see that the more woke a game is, the worse it tends to do in sales. With greater wokeness comes greater failure. Dragon Age Failhard, anyone? Dustborn? Concord? Any of these ring a bell? Were any of these a success? And to no one's surprise, a ridiculous number of important characters in this game are women. At times it feels like every major character and leader is a woman. Not only that, but most of the women look like female heads on male bodies. Tall, broad shoulders, wide bodies with gender-neutral armor. Boy, isn't it more interesting when all the characters wear the same kind of armor instead of having separate armor for the men and the women? Wouldn't it be more interesting to have separate, where it's different, where there's more variety? Might even give you a reason to play through as the other sex, so you can see the different styles of armor and whatnot that they have. And the way characters' mouths move is deeply off-putting. They pull their lips way back and expose far too much teeth. I've never seen a game where characters talk through their teeth so much. It would be as if I talk like this all the time, and it's just so unnatural that it just seems kind of weird. And that's how the characters at Avowed talk. I don't know how they got it that bad, but this is some of the worst lip syncing that I've seen in a game in a long time. And speaking of odd-looking stuff, what the hell is this? This guy's supposed to have been hanged to his death, but it literally looks like his default smiling model. He could literally be standing there in front of me happy about something and look the exact same. How did this pass quality assurance? I've never seen someone so happy to be executed in my life. It's like they just took the default character model and just put it up in the tree and was like, yeah, that'll just be his hanging model. We don't need to change anything. Yeah, his eyes are open and it almost looks like he's smiling, but we'll just leave it as is, don't worry about it. The game's performance for me was spotty. At times it played well over 100 FPS, at other times it would dip below 60. And just so you know, I have an Intel Core i7-14700K, 32GB of system RAM, and an RTX 4080 Super, so my system should have been more than good enough for this game. I kept edging the settings downward with little effect, ultimately settling for the DLSS option, NVIDIA's advanced super sampling, allowing the game to run at a lower res while using AI to upscale to my monitor's resolution. It unfortunately introduces visual artifacting, which was very noticeable at times. I ended up using a new tool called DLSS Swapper to force Avowed to use the latest DLSS 4 standard, since by default it uses DLSS 3. It seemed to work well, giving a better frame rate with fewer artifacts, so yeah, that was good, but I just prefer these games run well without any of that nonsense. I probably should have also locked the frame rate to something reasonable using Rivatuner's statistics server, but whatever, it's over now. I'm done with this game for the moment. There are a decent amount of graphics options, though not as many as other games. Turn off ray tracing, of course. That shit's almost never worth it. And of course, leave that damned pronoun indicator off. It's just another thing to break immersion and remind you that you live in current day. The story features a voice that continually speaks to you, always talking in riddles. It's clear that the devs wanted you to feel like this mysterious voice was all ethereal and shit, but it honestly gets real annoying real fast. Not only that, but you're constantly given the option to respond as if you were a rebellious teenaged Reddit user. The dialogue options in this game often feel like they were written for a
modern gaming audience,
and that's not a good thing. If you want to have a serious fantasy story, don't fill it up with immature Reddit-level shitposting dialogue responses. This game is one step away from letting you respond with meme images. It's that bad at times. Oh, and the woke isn't over yet. There's a quest to help a woman terminate her unborn child. There are two ambiguously gay dudes who talk about enhancing male performance with essence, and there are a few other majorly cringeworthy moments as well. What's next? A lecture on not electing fascist leaders who appoint rich people to make budget cuts? My gosh, can we stop injecting current day political themes in fantasy games already? We don't want them. We don't want them for any side. Not our side, not the other side. They just don't belong at all. So the story, it isn't great, but it's not terrible. I wish I could say the conclusion is satisfying, but far from it. I was very, very disappointed by the final encounter in this game. I won't spoil anything, but if you finish the game, you'll see what I mean. I was hoping the ultimate battle would be with a different opponent than it was, but alas, it was not to be. They cheaped out right at the end. Lame. My experience quickly devolved into me mashing the spacebar to skip through long-winded, verbose dialogue after verbose dialogue. Even selecting an option like, okay, let's go, often led to several more lines of dialogue with several more dialogue choices I had to make. I mean, if I say, okay, let's go, that should pretty much end it. We should be going at that point, not continuing to talk and continuing to get me to make some response to them, because really, none of it was interesting enough to make me interested in caring what response I had for it. I could hear the developers whispering to me, no, Fox, you're not done talking. You're not done talking yet. You're gonna keep talking to this NPC, and you're gonna keep responding. And all I can say is, no, please, just make it stop. Can I just skip all the dialogue and they can just choose some settings for me? That would have made my experience much better. So having finished that long bitch session, let me start my conclusion by saying that I did enjoy my time with Avowed, albeit with many caveats. If you don't care too much about story or characters, and if you avoid spending too much time in the uninteresting dead cities, you might just find that the combat, traversal, exploration, loot, upgrading, and leveling system here are all enough to make it a worthwhile gaming experience for you. People have been calling this game mid or mediocre, and yes, in many ways it is. But I think your judgment will depend entirely what you value in an RPG of this nature. Do you really care about attention to detail and world interactivity? This isn't it. Do you care about a truly engaging story with interesting characters? This isn't it either. Do you need your games to be free of intrusive DEI? Well, this could be worse, but this also isn't quite it. Do you care more about gameplay, exploration, loot, and leveling? Well, then this just might be up your alley, as long as you don't mind some of the caveats we mentioned before, but probably not at full price. If I were to give a dollar recommendation for this game, I'd tell you not to pay any more than $40 tops. If you're gaming on PC, your best bet is to subscribe to PC Game Pass for a month and play it there. Even without a special deal, you only pay about $12 plus tax. With a deal, you might pay only $1 or even get it for free for 14 days. You could beat the game in that time span and then unsubscribe if you don't want to continue. But me, I'll be keeping PC Game Pass for now. I'm looking forward to Atomfall, Kazan, Doom, Expedition 33, Wu-Chang Fallen Feathers, and a few others. Have you tried Avowed? And if so, what do you think? I'd really like to hear your comments on this, because I know this game is very controversial, and a lot of people in the anti-woke space believe this should be a total avoid scenario. I wouldn't say it's a total avoid, but at the same time, as I mentioned before, I am not trying to convince you to get this game or even to give it a shot. If you're determined to avoid it because of all the issues with Matt Hansen and what he said and some of the woke elements in it, then stick with it, stay the course, do that. Don't get this game. But if you don't mind the limitations that Avowed has, this might be something that's worth your time. And if you're still here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell icon so you always get notified of my new videos, leave a comment, that really helps out a lot. And also, you can join the channel for as little as $1.99 a month, and if you want to help me out in another way, you can pick up a copy of my novel. The link is in the description down below. And as always, my friends, stay real, keep playing, and never forget, yesterday's tomorrow is today's today. Thanks for watching.